these maskies, a lot of them do work for the government. In fact, the guy who got killed, the comedian, had been working for the government in a in a legal sense. He was sanctioned to be a participant in whatever government campaign they had going for.
Yeah. So when Rorschach brings up the idea that there's someone out there killing maskies, I'm just going to keep calling them maskies because it's quicker to say. Most people come back and say, "Oh, well, he worked for the government. He has like a lot of potential political enemies. He was practically a Nazi." So, it could have been the Russians, it could have been the Colombians, it could have been, whoever. So that's their default, like, defense of like, yeah, Rorschach, we know you're paranoid, but you're not necessarily right.
Yeah, you're not necessarily right, and there is evidence to you not, like you being, wrong. Like, we're not all in cahoots with. We're not all the same characters that we used to be, and we're not all comedians. We're not that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after he gives him the warning, he pretty much just leaves right after that, out the window.
And there's this grappling hook. I like it. Like that's the same way he came in. We assume.
Mm-hmm. But I like how. So we see Velt or Ozymandias in like a suit. But I like how it flashes to his action. He has like a couple different action figures of himself on the desk. And I like how you get to see the people not necessarily in their costume, but like in what they looked like back in the day when they were in their costume.
That's a pretty funny costume. I don't know if I'd want to fight.
Yeah, it's like a weird like cape around his shoulders and like cape around like...
It's a toga. It's like a very short...
type thing.
It's a very short toga.
Yeah, but it's not the one-sided toga. It's like a weird... I've never really seen that.
It's like a lady's peasant blouse.
Mm-hmm. And he's all gold.
But then there's also some foreshadowing.
He's purple and gold, I guess.
I'm not going to spoil too much of the big book. Now, this is 12 issues, by the way. So we're just talking about the first issue. So this is 12 issues. A 2-part show on a 12-issue.
On issue 1.
On issue 1. But there's some foreshadowing of a newspaper on his desk, and there's a doomsday something or other. Clock.
Pretty much, if you're glancing at it, you can just read Doomsday. Yeah. Doomsday Clock.
Doomsday Clock.
So it's a hint that there's something else even bigger going on.
Bigger going on in this world.
But, okay, so I love the things of Rorschach. After he leaves each one of these people, he just has another layer of paranoia and delusion where he's like, meeting with Veit, V-E-I-D-T, left a bad taste in my mouth. His liberal affectations, possibly homosexual, must remember to investigate further. Like, there's just no reason for it. Like, everybody he meets, he thinks is a drug addict or, the communist or a murderer. Or, he always thinks there's something hidden.
Yeah. Or something hidden. Yeah.
He always thinks there's something hidden.
Yeah. So
something to investigate.
Now, I thought this, like, I don't know how I feel about these next couple scenes.
Okay.
Because this is our first look at a superhero who is not, like, human at the base.
Well, okay. So he goes to our next superhero who does have superhuman powers.
Yeah.
And we know that right away because he's a giant and he's like a naked blue guy and he has like light coming out of his finger.
Yeah.
And his name is Dr. Manhattan.
Dr. Manhattan. So, Rorschach makes his way through a very secure military base where Dr. Manhattan is working on projects for the government.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lady who's there with him who, in her words, is a kept woman there to keep Dr. Manhattan happy. But she is an old maskie named Miss Jupiter.
No, is she Miss Jupiter? I thought she was the Silk Spectre. Or maybe she's like
No, because she says that was her mother. Her name. Her mother.
Yeah, her mother's name is
Juspesky. So her last name is Juspesky. So Jupiter was a name her mom assumed. So maybe it was just her mom's name, but I thought it was her name too.
But when we meet her further in the book, she is like the second Silk Spectre.
Oh, okay. So I guess she has two names.
Yeah. But there's some like he's naked. He's like this huge blue naked guy who we never see like full frontal nakedness, but he's just like hanging out in his giant blue butt.
Yeah.
It's like
and like he can change size. Like he seems like he has crazy powers, but it doesn't really show us what his powers are, other than when Rorschach leaves, he doesn't leave out the back window like he normally does. He kind of makes Dr. Manhattan a little upset, and he just like snaps his fingers, and all of a sudden he's outside finishing his sentence.
Right,
like
but he can
mid sentence.
We also see him do some levitating stuff where he's working with parts and pieces to this whatever it is he's working on. Giant machine.
Yeah. It's like he's trying to crack a code on some crazy sciencey thing.
Yeah, maybe I didn't believe that or something. I thought I saw him doing it with his mind. Okay, but we also get to. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was gonna say, so he brings up that the comedian died, and Jupiter is like good because he sucked. He tried to rape my mother.
Yeah, so we get a very a heated back and forth between Rorschach and Miss Jupiter here, and
we find out her mom like wrote a tell-all book and those kinds of things, but Rorschach doesn't seem to care. He's more just here to warn, and he kind of even brushes it off, which is a little surprising. He's like, I'm not here to speculate on the moral lapses of men who died in their country's service. I came here to warn. And she gets really mad at that. Yeah. And so that's why, like, Dr. Manhattan doesn't really seem to care. He just cares that she's upset. So.
Yeah, you better leave, John.
I think you ought to go.
He calls him John. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah, so we know Rorschach's name is John.
Wait a sec.
Oh,
no.
Sorry, I mean.
Dr. Manhattan's name is John. Also, just as a little side note, you see, Rorschach pop one of his sugar cubes that he picked up in a scene earlier. So that's pretty cool because Dr. Manhattan can what's the word? Like porthole people out of teleport people.
Mm-hmm. And he can like put his hands through things and he can grow in size and he's blue and he can like make things levitate. Like he takes apart this machine with his mind essentially and is like looking at it all levitating.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I didn't imagine that. Yeah, he is definitely doing that.
Mm.
And then there's a and because Rorschach had mentioned the
night owl.
The night owl, Miss Jupiter remembers that she and Night Owl used to be friends, and they don't see each other as much as they used to, and they make plans to
have a nice dinner.
And he says, and John, Dr. Manhattan, is just like, yeah, you should do that. Bye.
Yeah, go have fun.
And I like this this date that they go on because it's
there's a good like back and forth reminiscing about the past.
Yeah, so they have this fun. They have this fun date where she pays for everything because, why not let the government pay for me? I feel like I'm doing a service being this kept woman or whatever however she words it. But there is a very nice back and forth and even like some like they have this one was really kind of my favorite haha moment because there's very little laughter in this book. This is a comic, but it's not a
Yeah, it's definitely
book.
dark comedy if you think it's funny.
Yeah.
Like I think Rorschach is funny because he's so paranoid.
Yeah, and I think that this back and forth is funny because they're talking about like this guy who enjoyed getting beaten up back in the day, and they're trying to remember what his name is, and they're like, yeah, I beat him up one time, yeah, I beat him up too, and then like,
And then they're like, what ended up happening to him?
and they say Rorschach threw him down an elevator shaft, and then they both belly laugh at that. I mean, like some.
But they acknowledge that it's a weird thing or a dark thing to laugh at, but there's not that many laughs these days, and it's like cop humor.
Yeah, it's cop humor. And then there's
but it is funny to me that they do all this laughing, and then they say the comedian is dead. There's not too many laughs around these days. What do you expect? The comedian's dead.
Yeah, and then they end this first issue the same way that they started this first issue, with this pullback perspective, where they're like, you see the guy.
Oh, I didn't even bring that. Oh, that's great, Larry. Good call.
You see the people like getting smaller and smaller, and the buildings getting perspective.
Well, and so Rorschach had given Night Owl has the yellow smiley face that we saw at the beginning that the comedian had on his robe that was in the blood on the gutter. So at the first page, it's a close-up shot of this smiley face in blood, and then it zooms back and zooms back and zooms back. And it's the same thing here of you see the smiley face in Night Owl's hand, and then you see them standing on, like, by the side of a thing, and then you realize it's a rooftop, and then it's a bigger rooftop, and it keeps pulling away until you see kind of the skyline. It's really cool. They're very pretty.
Yeah. So that introduces all the characters, all the main players in this 12-issue series that gets very, I mean, like, this leads to big stuff.
Is it all the main characters, really?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So very impressive for a first issue to introduce so many characters, give them all so much depth, establish the plot, get the plot moving just a really little bit, motivation, backstory. I mean, so much is accomplished. And then, even on top of that, so you don't really have to read this excerpt of Under the Hood, which is the Night Owl's book, because it's not really necessarily important to the plot. But if you're interested in the backstory of, like, the history of, like, it's good character development for Night Owl, and it gives you a little bit of historical context of, like, how the Maskies came to be, or, like, some might have. It's his origin story.
I think I love it when comic books do that sort of thing, because it adds, like, a certain amount of, like, realistic something or other to, like, it just adds, like, depth to these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, like, this is, wait a second, did this book really happen? Is this a real book?
Yeah. It's very well written.
Yeah, I do, I just...
Oh, but my favorite part is, there's kind of, in it, it references that Night Owl met this lady who's an author, and he asked her, how do you write so well? And she said, what you do is you start off with the saddest thing you can think of, and then you get and that gives you the reader's sympathy, and you go from there. And so in his story, he tells the saddest story he can think of, which is it's a great little story, but it's not really that important. But in the Watchmen, at the beginning of this comic, the first thing that was said, which I thought was such a weird and great intro, and first line was Rorschach narrating he saw a dog that had gotten run over by a car.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, wow, that's a great example of, like, one of the saddest things you could think of.
Wow.
It's just like a little, but it was so unrelated. I'm like, why is that? I mean, it's a great description of like a city gone bad and like a gruesome image,